Welcome back to the President's Podcast. I'm Dr. Tekemia Dorsey, President of the Randallstown NAACP Branch 7032B. It's day 14 of the government shutdown. 2 weeks of uncertainty for small businesses and community organizations that rely on government partnerships. 2 weeks without pay for millions of federal workers. 2 weeks where leadership from the top has grown quiet in action. And when leaders go silent, people lose more than money. They lose faith. In episode 1, we talked about how real leaders must stand up when systems shut down. In episode 2, we explored servant leadership and how communities can lead from the bottom up. But today, on this 14th day of inaction, we're asking a harder question. What happens when silence becomes policy? This is episode 3, The Cost of Silence, Leadership, Carriage, in the 14th day of the shutdown. Silence is not neutral. In leadership, silence communications consent, even when what's happening is wrong. In these 2 weeks, workers have gone without pay. Families are juggling bills. Communities are stretching to cover basic needs. Yet, in the midst of this, we hear too little from those in power through action. Where's the sympathy, the urgency, the accountability? True leaders don't go silent when the people are suffering. They step into the discomfort even when it's politically risky. They say what needs to be said and then they act. What we're missing is the action. In my book, From Poverty to Prosperity, I talk about this exact moment when inaction is as damaging as poor decisions. Because every delay, every wait and see carries a cost, not in numbers, but in lives. Leaders and citizens can counter silence by doing a number of things. For example, creating community updates. Local leaders share what's happening weekly, especially if you're living in an HOA or neighborhoods where you're really close. Share what you see and what you hear. You can do it in a newsletter. You can do it by word of mouth. Nowadays, smartphones are only as smart as their owners. Create an email chain, a text mail chain. If you got Androids, I don't know what kind of chain it is, but I am pretty sure that it is something in the sense of being able to at least communicate. Even if there is no funding, information helps to build trust. Another thing that local leaders and citizens can counter silence by doing is establishing listening hubs. A listening hub is spaces where affected workers can also voice their concerns and connect to resources. Another word for establishing a listening hub could be a town hall. You don't have to wait for elected leaders to hold a town hall. You can do it in your neighborhood. You can do it at the local library. You can do it at a car dealership if they allow you to use their showroom. You can do it in your garage. You can do it in your home, at your local community center. Start the conversation. Another thing that leaders and citizens can counter silence by is empowering messengers. Empowering messengers mean identifying community advocates who can speak for those who are afraid to speak up. And there's always one in a crowd, one in an organization, one in a household that is willing to add their voice to the voiceless. During a previous shutdown, Baltimore County leaders launched what they call Friday Forums. And these Friday Forums were short gatherings where residents shared updates, jobs, and solutions. It cost nothing but created hope. So that is something that leaders and citizens can do to counter the silence that's happening from the top down and can evoke from the bottom up. Silence breaks trust, and speaking restores it. One of the hardest truths about leadership is this: silence often comes from fear. Fear of losing support, fear of being wrong, and fear of standing alone. But all of those things, especially the last one, people shouldn't have fear of standing alone. That's leadership. Be the one to stand up, do the right thing through action, accountability, and advocacy. Leadership trumps management all day. But courage isn't the absence of fear. It's moving forward anyway, anyhow that's possible. And it literally only starts with one person, one voice, one action, with your left foot forward and then your right foot following, or your right foot forward and your left foot following. But we got to move, everyone. We got to do something, because these 14 days can turn into 44 days, 84 days, and 144 days. Servant leadership is something that we discussed in episode 2. And servant leadership demands courage. It's not about power. It's about responsibility. And that servant leadership really comes from the people, the constituents, the voters, those that voted these individuals in a year ago, and those that will vote them or keep them a year from today, in a few weeks. So hold your elected officials accountable. Make sure that they are being responsible in your district or whatever area they oversee. Hold them accountable. The CEO who continues to pay furlough workers out of their pocket, especially in the shutdown, that's courage. The teachers who opens a free tutoring center during the shutdown, that's courage. The pastor who uses his or her pulpit to call for action, not patience, that's courage. The NAACP branch that continues to provide knowledge and awareness, that's courage. That's 7032B. But leadership without courage is silence dressed in a suit. Whew, let me let that resonate for a second. Leadership without courage is silence dressed in a suit. I think it's time to change the suit. Let's talk about courageous communication and how we can practice that. Courageous communication model encourages leadership or encourage leaders to release consistent updates even when answers are incomplete, because transparency builds credibility. Communication takes away the anxiousness, the fear, the uncertainty, the doubt, the loopholes. It prevents mental health breakdowns. It prevents suicide. It prevents people going stark crazy, and a lot of anger. Even if it's communication or content that people don't like, at least they're being made aware. And that's what's needed. And that's how we practice courageous communication. Organizations can open and create open forums. And that's, carriage calls when organizations create open forums where staff can express their fears and ideas without judgment. In today's time, there should be no judgment. And fears is happening all day, every day. People don't know where their next paycheck is coming from. People in the federal government and in the military are working not knowing what's going to happen to their children or their family. Organizations can open up hubs to allow Free Friday or a constant way to kind of express themselves without feeling like they can be judged or attacked based off their ideas. Communities can use social media for civic education. For example, share real-time updates, legal rights, and ways to help. For me, as president of the Randallstown NAACP 7032B, although I am just the voice in public, our way of sharing it is through a podcast. And I encourage you to do the same if you can provide solutions for people to implement, to know that they're not alone, giving them strategies, giving them an outlet, engage them, go live, whatever it's going to do to get people talking and strategizing in these dark days. A quote from my book is, true leadership in crisis isn't about the loudest voice. It is about the most consistent one. And I know for me, already working my business and running a branch and hosting activities and trying to do engagements and things like that, I vowed with not just this podcast and my other podcasts, From Poverty to Prosperity, is to be consistent. At one point, I've been doing a podcast since 2000. It's been a really long time. And I used to have a show and I was consistent, but it was kind of dreadful and having to stay on it. I think because my kids were younger, but now it's like a spark in me that is reminding me that I need to do my podcast, not one, but two. And it's important to do that because of what's happening in today's climate. So this is my contribution in remaining consistent, not just with problems, but things in ways people can get involved. And I encourage you to start a podcast, but most importantly, be consistent. So again, the quote from my book says, true leadership in crisis isn't about the loudest voice. It's about the most consistent one, from poverty to prosperity. Lend a voice and be consistent. That line reminds us that silence in leadership is not stability. It's neglect. Let's take a moment to think about what 14 days really mean. Because, day 3, 2 weeks ago, I didn't think it was going to last this long. And then a whole week and a half has gone by since then. That 2 weeks of missed pay for a federal security guard is half a month without bills being paid. At this point, he's probably sweating bullets on how mortgage or rent is going to be paid. 2 weeks of uncertainty for a single mom who works at a government agency, required to show up every day, but not quite sure when she's going to get paid or when she's going to get back pay. Those children have to eat. Those children have to go to school. The weather has changed right now. It's no longer 90 and 80 degree weather. It's a lot chillier. It's getting darker. And the list goes on and on. 2 weeks of delayed contracts for my minority business owners. So now not only is it just impacting the community, it's also impacting households, that family, but also businesses. 2 weeks of stress for children watching their parents worry. So now it is beginning to be a mental health crisis. And with mental health crisis, especially with our youth today that don't like to speak with parents or may not have a guardian there or an adult that they trust, they typically to start going inward, self-sabotaging, or have the probability to go with the wrong crowd. Leadership isn't about surviving the storm. It's about calming it for others. So that federal security guard, that single mom working at a government agency, those minority business owners with delayed contracts and not being paid, and those children watching their parents worry, we have to find some way to calm their storm. And I'm going to put a call out there for all of my mental health workers, my mind meditation, yoga, whatever your specialty is that provide strategies for balance. I'm going to ask you, as you listen to this, to tag yourself in this once this podcast is ended so I can follow it with you. Let's work together to see how we can help calm the storm for individuals. And this is why silence is dangerous. It multiplies fear. People don't know where to go. They don't know what to do. They faking a funk. They got on these weird masks because they don't want people to know that they're struggling. They don't want people to know that they're living under their paycheck. Poverty numbers are rising. We're in the midst of a massive political season, not just for Congress and the Senate and the White House, but people are running for or have begun or have already announced their bids for positions they're running for. Poverty is getting ready to hit us hard. What once was 6 months ago will not be 6 months from now. So it's going to be direly important that you understand who these candidates are, what their platforms are, and what is their vision of helping to turn your district, your county, your state around, because it's going to take a long time to get from underneath this mess. But there is also another side to this downfall, and and you've heard me talk about it in episode 1 and episode 2. It's community action. What can we do? In Baltimore and beyond, I've seen churches hosting emergency relief drives, small businesses open doors to furlough families, and neighbors checking in on one another. Matter of fact, growing up, all that I understood about community was neighbors checking in on one another. Now, in today's time, you're not quite sure, but nothing beats a knock on the door or ringing a doorbell or writing a note and taping it on someone's door to let them know that you're checking on them. If you are near a nursing home or if you have a elderly one, check on them. See how they're doing and what they might need. Servant leadership turns compassion into infrastructure. That's a t-shirt. Man, I got a lot of t-shirt ideas. It's all I want to tell you. Servant leadership turns compassion into an infrastructure where stability, accountability, responsibility, empathy, everything has the potential to turn that frown upside down. And that's the message from Poverty to Prosperity, that economic stability, innovation, and community building must walk hand in hand. There cannot be separate silos. There has to be collaboration and not competition. Now, for leaders in communities facing crisis, what can we do? Do we sit back and wait for 14 times 3? Do we take action? 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 Do we take a Do we keep allowing, the leaders to point fingers and food deserts become dry, and, transportation is empty, and people, mental health is breaking down, suicide rates are going up? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. What leaders in communities that are facing crisis, which is pretty much everyone, some are feeling it a little more than others, one thing they can do is develop a 14-day response plan. 14 days in shutdown, 14 days response plan. And what is that 14-day response plan? That is where one develops what needs to be done if a shutdown extends. For example, in your community, and let's say whether you live in a single family, an apartment, a condominium, community, where's food? Where's the local food shelter? Where's housing assistance? How do you communicate if lights go out? For what happens in a storm? So that 14-day response plan is where you look at the basic necessities and you build a communication plan around it. So you know where to go, who might need help, elderly, young people, single parent moms, two-parent families, young kids, old kids, the local stores, whatever. A second thing that leaders in communities facing crisis could do is build business community coalitions. That's where you encourage local businesses to adopt a family or to provide micro grants. If you live near the economic and workforce development, you might stop in and see what resources they have available. If you have shopping centers that are near you, stop in the local Pizza Hut, Chinese place, fast food place, whatever the case might be, to encourage those businesses, which could be a write-off, to adopt a family or set of families in a neighborhood, and see if businesses, if they are able to afford it, even your banks, to provide micro grants as resources. Use leadership networks. Civil groups like the NAACP can organize town halls to connect government workers with resources and advocacy. There are programs on the state level, at least in our state, where they have the local junior colleges for federal workers that have been furloughed or laid off to get into another career industry. Matter of fact, it's popping up all over the place. Our local government is doing, our state did it first. So find out what's happening in your area to help those. And the thing about when I'm seeing so much support for furloughed government workers, I love it. But there are also quite a few populations out there that are unemployed. Can we get them some help? Granted, they're not federal workers, but people have been applying for jobs that are not getting hired because they're overqualified, or their age, or their skin colors, or their gender. What about them? Hello, another discussion. But listen, jump on air. If you're one of those people in these populations where you're not a federal worker, but you're looking for a job, if you see a resource, go for it. Listen, every shutdown is a lesson. I saw something on Facebook today with the last Bush, not the father, but the son, there was no shutdown. With Obama, there was one shutdown. With Biden, and Obama served 2 terms. The youngest Bush the son served 2 terms. Biden, no shutdown. With this current administration, we've had 4 shutdowns. What is that telling us? There's a lesson out of every shutdown. And leaders should document what worked to prepare for the next. And that's the same with us as a community. What worked the last time? What didn't work the last time? Where were your resources? Who did you reach out to? What relationships have you established since then? What relationships do you need to reenact, to provide solutions? It's a lot of deep thought happening here. In my book, From Poverty to Prosperity, I make one thing clear. Poverty isn't just the lack of income. It's a lack of opportunity and leadership. And that was the case before the shutdown. And that is the case even more so right now. What we learned from COVID is that we are very resourceful when we want to be. And people created opportunities and they led from their homes. What's different now? Nothing, except it might be more children. Children might be a little older. You may not have been married then, but married now. You might have been married then, but divorced now. But the point is, you have to create the opportunity, seize an opportunity, and lead by example. When a government stops functioning, servant leaders must become innovative. And what does that mean? Businesses offering paid community service leave if they can afford it. Faith groups turning donations into microgrants. I absolutely love that idea. Local leaders using data to target the most affected neighborhoods. And you don't have to be an elected official to do that. In my county, go to the Department of Planning. See if you can link up with the representative from your district and see where the most affected neighborhoods are. Now, keep in mind, there were already affected neighborhoods before the shutdown. There's going to be even more affected areas as a result of the shutdown. Because servant leadership doesn't just meet needs. It creates new systems of empowerment. Systems. And I think that's the beauty that I see out of this shutdown, is that where there wasn't a system or a broken system, the community has an opportunity to create a new one or to close the gaps in the one that was broken. We have the power to create systems of empowerment if we start leading from within. Because prosperity isn't the opposite of poverty. It's the product of purpose. We have the power to turn shutdowns into startups. And I saw that. I witnessed it. I noticed it. As a matter of fact, my old braider, her business is called Lene Locks, and she's fabulous. Just before the COVID, she was braiding my hair and my two daughters' hair. And she was having this hard time with her 9-to-5 and her son, and she was opening up a new salon or a new location outside of her home. And then COVID hit, and then that shut down. And it didn't cause her not to believe in her dream. Until this day, 5 years later, she still works for herself. So that shutdown created her permanent startup. If we lead with courage, empathy, and innovation, anything's possible. We saw more businesses awaken during COVID than ever before. What's stopping it now? Us, you, me, working together. We got to find a way for the community to unite, because these 14 days might be 90 or 210 or 500. What we're going to do. Okay. We can also create community prosperity teams. This is 3 strategies I want to share. Creating community prosperity teams. Those are coalitions combining business, education, and advocacy leaders. Only takes a 1, 2 to 3 phone calls. Another thing that servant leaders through strategies can do is encourage corporate responsibility partnerships to help stabilize families during crisis. And as much as I believe in corporate responsibility, I'm also dismayed slightly because these corporations have a responsibility to the community, but it often comes at a cost. And I mean a cost in a sense of, if it's a banking institution, they only help those that bank with them, which I don't understand it, because this is your duty. We're planning, our branch is planning an economic development and sustainability summit. Had an opportunity to speak, to start outreaching for this event, and couldn't get a hold of people at some of the recommended agencies, corporations. Was able to get a hold of one, but I had to mail it in. Never know if there's going to be a follow-up, any of those things. So corporate responsibility is actually hard to achieve, but I'm going to stay positive and encourage that, because corporate responsibility partnerships can and do help stabilize families during crisis. But we got to find a way to break down these barriers and these walls to get to those individuals in those corporations, right? Okay. Another idea or strategy is develop servant leadership training programs for youth and future leaders under maybe faith-based organizations or nonprofits, community chapters. I know from my From Poverty to Prosperity book, I created a poverty leadership certification program for leaders and aspiring leaders. It's a 16-week comprehensive programming that allows people to graduate with a certification as a poverty informed leader. Then I created a 10-week equity and poverty informed certificate programs, mainly for educators, but also for community leaders, graduate students, whatever. And they come out with a poverty informed certificate, because it's not the problem and the causes of poverty. It is about creating solutions that the communities, businesses, families, community leaders, and most importantly, ourselves, need to know how to pivot in times like this. And if leadership is a bridge, servant leadership is in a hand that helps others cross. And for me, having poverty certificate and certification programs help to address the very thing that we're talking about and we're currently living. Whew. We talked about a lot, but keep in mind, day 14 is a reminder that silence has a cost, y'all, but service has power. Let me say that again. What we learned is that day 14 is a reminder that silence has a cost and service has power. When government leaders fall quietly, community voices must get louder. When systems shut down, servant leaders must stand up. When fear spreads, courage must multiply. This week, I challenge you 3 things. Speak up. Share facts, stories, and hopes in your circles. You never know how speaking up is going to have somebody to step down off that ledge. Instill hope. Build trust. So speak up. Find a way to serve. Join or form a servant pod focused on one local need. We talked about this in episode 2. Whether it's food, that's a need. Elderly, seniors, that's a need. Transportation, that's a need. Mental check-in, that's a need. And last, after you speak up and or serve, lead. Pick up from poverty to prosperity and use its tools to turn service into sustainable change. It's not a book, it's a movement. Leadership is not about titles, it's about timing. And ladies and gentlemen, we are living in that time. In this, the 14th day, it is time to lead. I'm Dr. Tekemia Dorsey. This is the President's Podcast. And remember, leadership isn't about position. It's about purpose. And when silence speaks, let your leadership be louder. Until next time on the President's Podcast, have a great day, lead with purpose, and be unapologetically you. Thank you. Have a good day.